Roger Hearns.
Ken Allers.
Roxanne Hossifras.
Ray Murphy.
Jim Adderholt.
Beach.
Here. Very good. Okay. All right, well, let's get right into it. The item here on the agenda is open items for council prioritization. Discussion with Public Safety Committee members on open items. I'll defer to you, Madam Chair, and you can take it for, you can lead us out.
Sure. The reason, obviously, for this meeting is all the open action items on the Safety Committee's to-do list. We've been running into some issues, candidly, that we do the research, we make the recommendations, and either get stalled out that nothing happens. And so it's this continued recommendation. We're just waiting for either to be completed or denied if we didn't have the funds. The second issue is things that we feel like we've given the recommendation and then it just either just not listened to, and so we want to take those off the list if you're not going to listen to us. But the bottom line is our goal is to come up with ideas and solutions for the town and the people and the visitors and the businesses that are safe. We want to work hand in hand with town council. And we feel at this point that there's a disconnect on what we feel is the most important and what we feel that we want to proceed with, and then nothing happens for years. And I could give examples such as the safe haven shelters, the street lighting, the FDOT. Some of it are out of your control, some are with the county. And so it's just becoming this crossroads. We feel like a little bit like it's Groundhog Day. And we want to be able to serve the council and give our recommendations so that we can proceed forward and that you give us action items and say, get it done, and we work together. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay. I just want to make one comment before we get going here. We're all on the same team. I mean, we all live here. We're all members of the community. We're all trying to make it the best place we can. That's number one. Number two is when you say we don't listen to you, we always listen. We may not agree, but we always listen. There's a difference. There's a difference. So with that being said, I don't want to have this be confrontational, but we're going to have a wide open wielding conversation here, it sounds like. And whoever wants to start, feel free to jump in.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I prioritize some of these things. I think it makes sense to start with the things that we can control and work backwards. Obviously, if we have control of the things, then we don't have to rely on someone else's permission to get them done. But to start the conversation, I think that would be the best way to proceed if everyone agrees.
Good.
That shortens the list.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll start with, on our list, I'm going to jump around then since we're,
Could I?
go ahead.
Because you said that shortens the list. It doesn't really, because I understand there's county things like the interlocals and that, but the question is, where do those stand? Is this, do you agree with what's here, and are you pursuing an interlocal, or are you not going to pursue an interlocal? There's an example where, in theory, it would be out of your control, because the interlocal is going to determine whether this happens if the county agrees. Those are still things that are open on this list that we bring up month after month, and we wait for some action. So if, for example, on the crosswalks, and we should have a discussion on the crosswalks, if you want to pursue expanding the number, like 77% of the citizens wanted us to do, then that's something that, in theory, is out of your control because the county determines where they go and if they're going to put them in. But it's really whether the council is going to go to the county, pursue putting in additional crosswalks, or whether you're saying, we don't want to pursue that, we don't want to expend the capital to do that, the political capital, or we have other priorities with the county that we want to pursue. And if that's the case, that's fine with us, because we completely understand, Ray, that the council is the one responsible for the decision. But we spend time looking at that. We keep it on here because survey showed, plus we've had discussions for 3 years now about expanding the number of crosswalks. There are reasons that you can't do that, or the cost involved in that, but it is something that control is we want to pursue or not. So you don't determine whether the crosswalks go there, but you do determine whether the council, as a council, wants to position going for more crosswalks or not. So I just want to clarify that it's out of your control to put them in, but it's certainly within your control to decide if you want to pursue it with the county or not, and then let us know if you want to pursue it or not.
Whether there's a will, whether there's a will.
And to add to that, even if we've, I'll give you a great example, street lighting. We gave our recommendation, went off to you. We take that off our plate at that point. I mean, it's really to that next step. I know we're all anxiously waiting, but at what point do you say, all right, safety committee has done their analysis, they've given us our recommendation, we're taking it, get off your list and let's start worrying, getting some other action plans to take care of.
Personally, I don't know that there's anything more you could do about street lighting at the present moment.
Exactly, well, that's our point, but we have it on our, this open item, and that's why we say, should we take these things off and move on?
Like, you know, with my times with committees, I do find that it can be, one of the most difficult things to do sometimes is pare down your agenda. There are things that are, you're waiting on something, it's a recurring kind of thing. I think that, you know, my advice would be to take that off your list, and if something comes up in the future, some change, then maybe it'll come back to you.
Right, so how do you want to handle this? Do you,
Well, we could
how would
just-
you like me to proceed? To go read the list, or
Well,
do
we could do that. We could go item by item, and then, well, let's, as long as we're on the street lighting, why don't we just, let's just get off of that right now. I mean, is it our recommendation that the committee steps back on this item unless anything else comes forward?
I think that's appropriate. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where the council has appointed you to be the front person with the negotiations, so I don't know how much more discussion there needs to be at a committee level.
Exactly.
And if something comes up, then Ray, you can contact us and say, you need to look into this, whatever.
Well, I will use you as a reference to find out what you already have come up with,
Right.
because your research has been fairly exhaustive, so I'd be able to come to you and just ask, and as a matter of fact, I will do that, because I won't have all the answers, so I'd be happy to do that, so.
I do think, you know, in the normal course, you do have a liaison. And if something comes up in council and he feels that he should bring that to you to further discuss, likewise, if something happens with you and you want to get an informal voice on council, you have a liaison.
Right? You want to check the street lighting off then? All right. Let's continue. Go ahead.
Start at the top.
I was going to start at the top. So sidewalks on Crescent, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th Street. The estimated completion date is 2nd quarter 2022. I think we're on schedule. And we don't have any more discussion.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Roger?
Well, I think, question for all of you is this where the town's sidewalk projects end? Or are we now going to then look at some additional streets? And if we is the council going to ask perhaps the Public Safety Committee to prioritize the next series of streets that may warrant sidewalk or not? So that's, so I think you've turned a corner on the ones on the numbered streets in the downtown area. The question is that it for sidewalks for the immediate future, or we want to look at perhaps the next streets in terms of this committee or some other committees' evaluation as to what should be the next priorities? Again, you know, and I think you all know the issue is that for the most part, most people feel that they don't want them in front of their house. We had that experience when we talked about Connecticut Street, I believe it was. So I want to give you that caveat that most of the people that feel like the right-of-way is part of their front yard, and most of them, at least, who have come and talked to town council and to me privately, have said to me they don't necessarily want them in front of their house. You and the committee have to do is say, well, the public good generated by sidewalks exceeds their individual preference.
Well, I can only say that the people on the south end of the island that have got sidewalks now that have never had them before are absolutely thrilled to have sidewalks down there. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But, you know, it was so unsafe for so many years that it's been a tremendous help. The rest of them continuing down will be as well. So, and I think some of the naysayers over the years that not want them out in front of their houses have gotten to see the benefits of having them out there. But I can't speak for everybody. But so I would leave that to the committee. If you wanted to explore my recommendation, if you want to explore the possibility of more sidewalks and approaching these neighborhoods that lack sidewalks, that would be worthwhile to look into.
I agree. I think it's something that should be expanded upon, go throughout the island, find streets that the committee feels, or, you know, through research or whatever they need to do to get the data, what streets would benefit, and not maybe just expand it a little bit, but why they would benefit. You know, just putting in a sidewalk, people that maybe live on the street think it's just a sidewalk, but I think if they could be presented with what the benefits are, you know, you're elevated off the road, similar to, and now we have a pretty good blueprint that goes up and down Estero Boulevard that people can actually feel, see, touch, walk on, ride on, and understand the benefits of it. So I would be in favor of you continuing to look into other streets up and down the island. And again, that's one of those things that are within our control as far as decision-making goes.
I would, though, put a caveat that it's got to be a street that has significant traffic. We are an island of lots of little one-way dead-end streets. They don't have a lot of traffic, and all the traffic there is local. And when people do put down sidewalks, it does take up quite a bit of people's right-of-way that they are using. It changes the feel. So I think if you are looking at sidewalks, I think it really has to do with how much vehicular traffic is on those.
I guess my feeling is, I would love to see more sidewalks on the island, but I was the one who went through the whole Connecticut Street debacle, and I want to warn you, if you take that on, you're probably going to be disappointed, because the blowback from the people who lived on that street was huge. If there's any place we needed a sidewalk on the island, it was to get down to the Mound House. There's now no sidewalk between our parking lot and the Mound House. Kids have to walk down the street in order to get there because the neighbors complained about it so vociferously, and the council at that time did not have the will and canceled half of the project for the sidewalk down there. So if you guys decide to tip your toe in that, I think you're going to get a lot of public pushback.
Controversy, because I would disagree with almost everything that she just said.
What would you disagree about?
It's a quiet one-way, it's a dead-end street except for the Mound House. It has always been a quiet street. It was residential till the Mound House was put in. I've been down there and walked down the street, and
If we didn't put a sidewalk there, what other street, where would we put it? The other streets don't have a public agency at the end of the street where there's traffic walking up and down the street.
Okay, well,
So if you don't
into
put one on the
controversy.
Connecticut, you don't put one anywhere.
We're getting into a demonstration of the controversy, whether or not it should be on the list or not. We don't need to debate that topic again now.
I guess that's just what committee, I'm not sure you want to take this on, because I think it's one of those situations where you're going to do a lot of work and be disappointed.
I just say I have to agree with Roxanne that that street should have a sidewalk. Even now with the farmer's market, if you're trying to walk to the farmer's market or you're trying to go anywhere on that street during those days, it's chaos.
And there is a sidewalk where the farmer's market is. The place I didn't go was from the stop sign down to the Mound House.
Right, I understand that. But if I walk from my house, I'm coming down Shell Mound, I'm coming up Connecticut, so.
We have a sidewalk on Connecticut Street.
Okay, I really don't want to relitigate
Detail.
Connecticut Street here today.
We can,
So it's just a matter of whether we want more Connecticut streets in the future.
Well, no, well, I think the issue here, Mr. Mayor, now, and I'm sorry for interrupting. So I think this is a classic example of why we're here today. That is that, and I think Vice Mayor made this point. You can make a recommendation, and you may, if you decide to look at this issue, but don't be disappointed if, once you've made it, it doesn't go anywhere.
And again, committee talked about this, it's what issues do you have? You're the council, you hear from your citizens daily. What issues that are on this list that they have been raising, or they raised in the survey, or they raised to us, that you want us to continue to pursue? If sidewalks and additional sidewalks for safety reasons are something that you would like us to look into, then the committee would go down just like we did with every other issue, go from one end of the island to the other, look at what sidewalks there are, look at the volume of traffic, look at the type of traffic that's there, and come back to you and say, these are areas that we found that potentially could have improvement by putting sidewalks in. That's exactly what we did with a number of streets, and with Crescent, there were none. There were heavy traffic, foot traffic. It was documented. Joe LaDuca took videos on end of the area. Ed Scott was in there every day looking at that traffic, and that's why we came with the original recommendation for safety reasons. The question is, I'm not looking for work. The question is, if there's sidewalks or potential for safety issues on the island, whether it may be down by Leno, I don't care where it is, do you want us to look, make a recommendation of areas that we see as potential safety issues for pedestrians walking in the road as opposed to being able to walk on a sidewalk? I agree, Roxanne. This council or the next one, when the recommendations come forward, may say no, but that's not our issue. Our issue is, do you want us to look at it? If you do, we come back with a recommendation. You decide based on all the other factors that you bring into that decision whether you want to do it or not. We just don't want to do research for something that you don't see as an issue, and therefore we're just spinning our wheels because it comes back and it's not something that you have a priority for us to address.
I can only speak for myself personally. I haven't had anybody beating down the door wanting additional sidewalks. It's just me personally. But, that's anecdotal, and you don't really hear from everybody down every street on the island, you know. So, I mean, if it's the will of the council to just do somewhat of a, as John's talking about, some sort of public safety survey to identify any problem areas, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. But with the caveat, John, with what Rexanne said, is that expect blowback from certain areas. And I wouldn't think to go in and on a side street and put in sidewalks if the people on that street didn't want the sidewalks. I just wouldn't think about it myself.
The good news is, you get the blowback, we make the recommendation based on the facts. So.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. If it's a worthy project, I think, to identify those areas.
And actually, we're not the only ones who get the blowback. I have been present at other committee meetings where people showed up and they were very angry, for example, about the beach access restrooms. There was a crab meeting I was afraid people were going to come to blows with the committee. So that you know, people will probably show up at your committee meetings being quite angry about the sidewalk issue. So I would rather see you work on something else where I think we could actually accomplish something.
I think the point too, if you have a long list you're trying to prioritize, I wouldn't put that high on your priority. You got other things that are probably more valuable.
It's 2 for not.
From a priority standpoint, I would not be in support of spending your time on that. There's so many other issues that the island faces that I think have a greater priority that I too agree that would not be one. I think the work that you've done thus far has been yeoman on that, but I just see other priorities that could consume your time more effectively.
There's your consensus.
Perfect.
All right.
That's maybe that's the best way, kind of where we're going with. We don't need to hash out every decision.
That's
Great,
great. That's great.
So crosswalk, it's almost the same type of discussion. We recommended expanding the number of crosswalks, did the study, did the rationale placing for the lighting design. Obviously, it has to work hand in hand with the street lighting, which we're on hold. You want us to table this as we're waiting for items, and you have our recommendation, and we just put it into, we don't talk about it anymore.
Here's what I want to comment on, because I don't know the history of the issue, Dawn, and all the work that you've done thus far, having just been on the council for a year and a half. But I do want to address John's point, because I know you all have spent a lot of time on the foot of the bridge issue with respect to the number of crosswalks there, location, et cetera. We're in this unique quandary where we really don't control our own destiny. We had a presentation from the state. Again, very thankful that they are investing in our community. They didn't appear to be sensitive to the crosswalk issue. They didn't seem to be sensitive to the various pedestrian guardrails, to potential for overpasses, just other traffic considerations that I think you all have opined on numerous times. There's significant state dollars involved in that project, significant county dollars, to a lesser extent, some local money. A critical project for our community, and I think what I would love to see is when the state, the state will go through this process where they'll have a public meeting to take input, and we've seen, I don't want to be cynical, but those aren't always those aren't always game changers. But I do think if we, as a council and a public safety committee, work together to try to get our input to the county commissioners, to the state, and work together to try to come to a consensus on what some of the tweaks might be to that foot of the bridge project. And again, also we had Rob here from the county. I asked about the crosswalk issue there, and I just think we're in this limbo now with the negotiations for the county on lighting, and that will impact everything on Estero, and that'll impact the crosswalks as well, and what their commitment is going to be to the crosswalks and what they'll do. I would like to see us figure out and spend some time getting in sync together so we can, as John said, use our political capital in a uniform way to advocate to our county commissioners, to the state, and basically publicly for a particular solution that we think benefits Fort Myers Beach the most, not just from a public safety standpoint, but from a traffic standpoint, quality of life standpoint. I think that's an area where, again, it's challenging because we don't really have control of our own destiny on this. When we're so dependent upon advocacy to third parties, but I think if we advocate together in a uniform way as best we can, I think we could be more effective in impacting some of those decisions. If that makes sense.
I would just say we had, like you said, we had Phelan here today, and he was talking about some of their rationale for the lighting and the signs and things around crosswalk, about eye fatigue. They went through their design process. I think that with the reconstruction of Estero Boulevard, we have more crosswalks than we did, maybe less than you recommended. But I think this thing, I look at the process as you guys are you're one of the first people in the process. Some of the raw research, make recommendations. It goes to council, we can make recommendations down the way. But something like now the crosswalks around town, that's already gone well beyond, I think, the stage where your involvement is worth your time. I mean, they've already laid out the road. I think that trying to get them to change, like add crosswalks or even put in warning devices where they don't have them now would be coming upstream.
I would say I agree with Bill. You've done the research, you've given us the recommendation. I wouldn't be spending your time on this any further. If the time arises where there's a point where your advocacy could help us with the county, when we're in a negotiation or something, we could let you know that we would want you to, send letters of support or something like that. But I would say I would not put that on your agenda presently.
I would take it a little further. Some of these issues, I can tell you personally, I've been dealing with and talking to the county in the background. It's not that we've been ignoring you. It's, we have conversations and it's got to go through this person and that person, this person and that person. And one word that always keeps coming out, and it came out today several times too, is Green Book. They don't do anything, it seems like, unless it falls within the Green Book guidelines. I think your time would be better spent understanding what that Green Book says based on some of the issues that are listed in here, so we can have a better understanding of what they're going to tell us they're going to do anyway. As Madam Mizera said, you've given us very detailed information with the crosswalks. We can definitely, as Councilor Adeholt said, we can move forward as a united voice and say we don't agree with what you're doing. At the end of the day, I'm not confident that it's going to change their mind. I think the better understanding we could have through the committee of what the Green Book says in some of these certain situations when it comes to crosswalks and lightings, give us a better understanding of asking for something that we're not going to receive. if I'm making sense. Because a lot of these issues on here fall within that green book word that we keep hearing. I can tell you, I've talked about some of the other things on here. I asked about the crosswalk markings today, or the bike markings today. I asked about the stripe down the sidewalk is another issue. The crosswalks, I asked about that, and every single one, the first word that came out was green book. Green book says this, we're looking at it. The green book says this, we're looking at it. I think we need a better understanding of what this green book says. I've never seen the green book, but it seems to me, and this is just my personal opinion, that they're following with whatever that says. They're not going to deviate very much. Doesn't mean we won't keep pushing, we won't keep trying, and at the end we can say we told you so. Hopefully we never have to come to that, but it seems like the best direction, in my opinion.
In addition to that, he also mentioned things where maybe something isn't as safe as you think. You think you're going to put something in place to make additional safety, but it creates other problems, and makes it less safe. He was mentioning that with the stripe on the sidewalk.
She had a very valid point. I don't know if you guys caught it this morning. I don't mean to jump ahead on here, but one of the issues with the stripe down the sidewalk where the pedestrian is on one side and the bicycles are on the other side, and I had never thought about it until he said it, is you come to a driveway and it drops down, that could be a potential hazard and cause more with a bicyclist or someone on a three-wheel bike or something that is riding that could tip them over into the road. So again, he went back to the Green Book and said that tells us through their research that this could be more dangerous than helpful. Had we known that ahead of time, maybe we wouldn't have spent so much time making a recommendation for something that they're not going to do. In my opinion, they're not going to do that.
Again, as far as prioritization, I would recommend you remove unless something new is.
I agree.
Know that personally, I'll be in the background continuing that fight to especially for the base of the bridge, because I don't agree with what they're doing there. But
The next item.
And that's the next item.
yeah, well, there's a good segue then.
So, and I think if you watched our conversations with the state on the foot of the bridge, we all expressed some serious reservations about aspects of that design. And the main, I think, reservation we had was where some of those crosswalks were, and the fact that they're removing the guard railing. Because their reply was they're putting a traffic light that will calm traffic. And I think we mentioned that if that light turns yellow when someone's coming off that bridge, but we made our recommendations to the state, but it's their road and they go by their.
You did make a recommendation to the state? A
They were
formal
here presenting.
recommendation?
It wasn't formal, we were having a discussion.
Well, I don't believe it was formal. We definitely let them know we weren't happy with the decisions, but there was nothing formal presented to them, as far as I know yet.
They were unequivocal in their response to every suggestion we made, that they really were not open at all to any of our suggestions.
There's a way of background, Jim. I'll do this. I think Elsie and I were the only ones that were there at the time. We were asked by the county to look at where crosswalks, additional crosswalks should go in the design for different phases, and we were asked to do that. And that's what we did, and that's when, and Heidi documented every one of them. Talked about the flashing lights and the additional lights. We had a lot of discussion about eye fatigue, and they basically talked about eye fatigue, start out with signage. Years ago, Ray, you remember there was so many signs on the street, you couldn't figure out where you were. They used that as the rationale for not putting in these flashing, these RFB, these flashing lights at main intersections or crosswalk areas. So this was something the county asked us to do. We came back with proposals, and they sat. And so that's the background on it. But there are really three different things here. There's the crosswalks, the length of Estero. And I personally don't think they're going to change one. They're not going to add one. It's too expensive. They're going to change the curbs. They got to add the crosswalks in there. There's no way they're going to go with that expense after just finishing this. On the other hand, the RFBs, you had 77% of the residents on this island, and the people that responded, said that the markings are not sufficient, that there should be more flashing lights out there. And if their argument it is eye fatigue, count how many RFBs are out there. There's no eye fatigue on there. There's less than a half a dozen the length of the side, the entire Estero Boulevard. When you go to Junkanoo and down there by Red Coconut, when that thing's flashing, everybody sees it and they stop. And most people stop because they see it. There's other areas where there's a lot of crossing, example is at Connecticut, where people cross there quite often, and there is no RRFB there. And so people are walking out, and they're walking out blind because there is no highlight for those people. We're not gonna change the color of the markings on the road to make them more visible, to attract people to use them, and also to attract people that are driving along, that this is a crosswalk, watch for this, and look on both sides to see if someone there. We're not gonna put the additional flashers out there. We're gonna have the same situation we have right now, where people continue to drive through and people are crossing over those things. I don't care, personally, I don't care if we don't do it or not, but my concern is defaulting to the Green Book without having these thorough discussions with those engineers and having them give us the justification other than the Green Book. That's just my 2 cents. I guess I'm a fighter, and I'd like to have some of those more in-depth discussions. We talked about the foot of the bridge the first time, and Roger and Anita went and they met with the county. Next meeting was in, I believe it was February or March, because that's when they made their proposal. I talked to Rob, I was the chair at the time, and Rob said, well, let's get together, we'll bring our people in, and we'll take you through a comparison of the Green Book, what you want, and see what options there are. COVID hit. Never met again because COVID hit, and the whole foot of the bridge kept getting delayed and delayed, so we never had that discussion. Personally, I think those discussions should be happening. And the only way we have that is with your blessing. And if you're saying not to do it around the RFBs and not to do it around the foot of the bridge, so there's a formal consensus from the town council, not individual citizens, but the town council that goes to the Florida Highway Department and says, this is our town and this is what we want and this is the reason we want it, then we can take all of these things off. 2 cents.
And also, I think the whole argument on eye fatigue as it relates to the flashing lights, the RFBs, erroneous, because they're not all flashing all the time. They only flash when a citizen approaches and activates them. You can literally drive the entire length of Estero Boulevard and see none of them on, and they're not going to attract your attention at all. On the other hand, if they are on, they will attract your attention. I get the signage. People get concerned about too many signs, lose your activity on signs. Focus goes away. I don't agree with that at all on the lights, and I think there are a number of crosswalks that would benefit from having flashing lights that are activated by a citizen desiring to cross the street at that location. Not going to contribute to eye fatigue at all to drivers.
Jim, I would just say I live in front of one of those flashing signs, and they're spectacular. They're game changers, particularly for senior citizens. The pedestrian still wants to wait till the car stops before they cross,
Right.
But that's the only way you get that car to stop is those flashing lights. And I think if, again, back to what I was saying earlier, if we could work together to prioritize those intersections that we think we ought to fight for to get those flashing lights, I think that adds value. And I think we collectively then go to the county and collectively make our case publicly for those flashing lights. And I think there's a chance we could be successful. Now, Rob was saying something about an island. If you have now that we have a 3-lane road, Dan, I don't know if you caught that, but he said if you have a flasher, you now have to have an island of some sort. I didn't quite understand what he was getting to on that, but
It's a safety place
Yeah.
in the middle of the road where if the pedestrian gets caught, they can stand up on that little island and let a car pass them.
If you look in front of the Holiday Inn or the Wyndham, they had one there before they started redoing the road.
actually, I'm not sure how that enhances their safety, but
What he was saying to us is that's going to be a new state requirement now. If they put up one of those rapid flashing light beacons on a 3-lane road, it's going to have an island. That's then going to deal with the whole stormwater issue and the place where we have the tiles, et cetera.
And an intersection, you really can't put one in an intersection because turn lane.
Just for
Maybe
the record,
exceptions.
that we did look at those when we met with Rob and came up with the crosswalk designs and that. We did identify the 3 places where those would be appropriate. The real value is it's a safe haven, but it's also a shorter distance that someone had to cross one lane they get in a safe area, and then they cross again. But it's the way they cross, coming across, you look both ways, you get the chance to look one way, get in a safe one, and then you look the other way. And so there's the increase, especially, it was down the Linnell, Wyndham area, where there's been incidents before where people just can't get across there fast enough. This is what those were looked at. You'll see in the recommendations that Heidi gave 2 years ago, we actually identified 2 or 3 of those with Rob as to where they could go.
I think that's worth fighting for, if we can get it through the county.
I think, kind of a point I see with this is, if there's something very specific like that, then there's a better argument than saying, let's look at all the, the stripings and the signs and everything, and saying that we have 2 locations that we think are suitable for this. You argue for those 2 locations and keep the argument concise and simple.
Can you resend us that? You said you did it a couple years ago. You sent that in. Obviously, it was probably before 3 of us were here. The data you had on the crosswalks, you said you've already done the research?
Yes, I have the map that we did. And I believe last meeting, joint meeting I was at with Council, Roxanne, you were there, and we were in a circle, and I had that large map, and I believe that was, I still have that map, so I can get it to Chelsea, and she can get down and copies for it.
On that, it identified the places that you thought the RFBs would be
Yes.
best suited? I'm shaking his head no.
Just take this opportunity to say, been saying this ever since the town incorporated, that it is absurd in my mind, the town of Fort Myers Beach not to own Estero Boulevard. We wouldn't be sitting here having all these discussions month after month, after year, if we owned the boulevard. This town should own Estero Boulevard. And when the county's done bringing it up to the standards that it should have been so many years ago, that's the time to take Estero Boulevard. And I'm going to keep saying it. I know some people don't agree with me, but we wouldn't be killing ourselves, beating up ourselves over all these issues if the town owned its own main street. And that's my opinion, and I'm sure there's some other support for that amongst the people here on the beach. But anyhow, we'll move on. Madam Chair, you want to take the next item?
Can I just make one point about the crosswalks or other things that are similarly situated? When we develop a list of things that we think would enhance safety, someone who spent 30 years in county government, I could tell you getting a list is very difficult to work with. Getting a list of your number 1 and number 2 and number 3 priority in terms of your list of maybe 10 or more things is a much easier thing to work with, because then you get number 1 done and you start working on number 2 and you start working on number 3. You're never going to get 10 or 20 or whatever of anything. So to the extent that there is a list, maybe there should be some thought as to, of all these, this is the one we need first, and go from there. So, because then we make a case about a very specific location versus getting our request watered down with the problem with location 3 and location 4 and location 7 and all that. We just focus on location 1 and get that done, because.
You're saying take one at a time? Is that?
Well, I think the county's not gonna come in and put 20 in. We know that. So if we, would start with, say, the top 3, maybe 5, and say, okay, these are our priority order, and at least in our opinion, the ones that need the attention, because more people cross there, there've been more accidents there, there's distractions there, there's a case for them to perhaps look deeper into the Green Book to find a reason to do it, and to just sort of cross it off because it doesn't check every box.
Actually, Roger, we have that list. We made a priority list of which ones we thought they should do first. I have that, so I'll get that.
One of the other things I picked up today when I was asking about the crosswalks that he said, and reading between the lines, is he said that they monitor the crash statistics. And he didn't say it, but it led me to believe that it's almost like a recall on a new car. Do a cost analysis on what it costs to replace it versus the damages they could entail if they don't fix it. And that's just my personal opinion. That's the way I read between the lines. I don't know if that's something that you guys have looked at as far as, and maybe that's why the one in front of the Wyndham got done, because they always had the most issues there. I don't know if that's the reason why they put it in there or not, but maybe that would be something that help the argument, if you will, to get them installed is, data says there's been this many crashes, there's been this, there's at this location, that would help prioritize to have a better argument with the county.
Mr. Mayor, may I just make a point about the foot of the bridge design? Maybe people didn't realize this, but the county commissioner and the county manager came here and they showed the foot of the bridge design to the council. And this was after the meeting that John was alluding to. And you were asked, not you personally, but the council was asked, do you endorse this? This is what we're going to send to FDOT. And the council said yes. And then that went to FDOT, and then things like the Green Book get applied, and that sort of dictates in their minds where the crosswalks go. So when that traffic pattern was selected, and the comment was made at that time that, well, yeah, but we want to make sure that people that within the oval and the triangles, whatever, you're channeling the people so that people aren't crossed on a improvisational basis, that they're channeled. That set FDOT traffic engineering team and designers on a path. Now, we can argue the result they came up with, but that was, a very important step as to how we got to where we are today. So let's not forget that.
And I remember that specifically because we were given 2 maps from whatever to look over. And we then in turn did our own map and gave back to the council 3 maps and said, this is the one that we redid, that we recommend, and they didn't choose that one. They chose one that the county had sent. They chose one with way more cross.
They rejected my map too.
They chose one with more crosswalks than we had recommended, is what they did.
So I guess the question is again, it's the same thing with the crosswalk above and the FDOT. We are more than happy to take this off our list. We've made our recommendation, but we are more than happy to go with you and form an alliance if you have a meeting with Florida DOT or with Lee County for the crosswalks. We'll go in with our guns blazing and sit with you and see if we can get something changed. If we can't, we can't. But again, we made the recommendations. We'd like to take it off our list and know that when you're ready to call on us, go fight the good fight, we'll come there and help.
And I would say, take it off your list and we'll let you know when you can help us. I think you've done your work.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay. We got street lighting done. Holly Safe Haven Shelters, prototype on Bay Street. It still does not have the emergency calling equipment, and there was no funding allocated for the 2021 and 2022 budget. Do you want us to drop this down our list until budgeting comes for next year?
How much was that, Dawn? Do you recall?
Oh, John, I think you have it right
It's in your
there.
packet.
Yep.
I don't have it in front of me. Just, you have a,
I don't know that we have the ability, it's county Lee-Tran property. We would have to get their permission to be able to spend money on that bus shelter.
I'm just curious to see how much it is and
I remember where this went, is that they said that if we would allow advertising, they would put bus shelters up.
$9,500, John?
If we didn't, then we had to pay for the shelter.
As I remember, it was kind of given to us that if we started interfering in that process, then we had to pay for the whole thing, which we chose not to do. And they insisted upon the advertising, which we said no to.
All right, so I think this warrants just stepping back for a second and just having a conversation that I think Council Veach is raising, and that is, is the council's policy on bus shelters, and in particular, the adamant position with regard to no advertising versus perhaps a position of saying, you can live with advertising, but we would prefer it to be from the zip code, businesses within the zip code versus none whatsoever, or, it's open to anybody and everybody. Someone in New York can advertise their deli. But, so that's question A. And the reason that's important is because if the council were to become more flexible about bus shelters, this issue of do you put the emergency call, if that's going to be a town expense, on 25 bus shelters versus the one prototype. That's why it's important to get that reconciled. It's only going to be the one. We can talk about how we fund it. But obviously, if it's going to be 25, that's going to be a different situation. So if the council's policy remains the same as it goes to bus shelters, general way, we need to sort of just get that, reiterated or reaffirmed before we talk about the one emergency call.
The original proposal was 6 locations, just to let everyone know, and this was our prototype to get started to see if it was something that we wanted to move forward with.
I think
We could obviously find $9,500 for a prototype.
I think what Roger, I don't want to speak for Roger, but I think what he's trying to say is, at point A he was making is, Lee-Tran is willing to put up these shelters. The only thing we have to give up is the stronghold on we don't want advertising. That seems like a fairly easy thing to overcome.
That's not what I remember the conversation was, though.
I thought that's what was.
As I remember the conversation was, we couldn't just pay for a 911 thing to be added to a shelter that they already built. As I remember it, they were saying, if you want to be involved in this process, you pay for the entire thing, and on top of that, you have to allow advertising.
I think there's 2 issues that are being blended together. So, the issue of bus shelters, and Chelsea, correct me if I'm wrong, has always been about this advertising issue. Okay, so if the count about whether or not we will allow advertising on them. So that's issue 1. And issue 2 is if we're going to allow Lee County to put in bus shelters, Gus will be more flexible on the advertising, and can't they include the emergency call? And if they do include the emergency call, do we have to pay for them, or do they pay for them? That's the hierarchy of decisions that have to be made. So the very easy decision is, on the one, we go to Lee County and say, hey, we'd like to put this in, do you object? We'll do it at our expense. Easy smeezy. We'll get a yes, we'll get a no, it'll be done. Question is, I don't want to set that precedent if next council meeting, we're going to agree to 25 bus shelters, and now we're going to have to put 25 of these in, potentially at the town's expense. That's a bigger decision.
So 2 points. One, this is freestanding. It's not part of, attached to that shelter. It's freestanding in the vicinity of that shelter. Obviously, the closer the better, because the idea is when we put, and as Dawn points out, there was 6 these safe haven shelters that we were recommending, not 25. So let's say worst case, the max is 60 grand over X number of years that you do this. The idea was that there would be an emergency calling capability at these shelters so that people visiting the island and residents would know that if they saw a safe haven shelter, they could go there and they could get immediate contact with emergency services. The argument people are making, everybody's got a cell phone, but not everybody knows where they are. Certainly visitors have no idea where they are when they're using their cell phone. So the idea was we put these there, part of a standard safe haven shelter, and people would know that that capability exists basically within a half mile from where they are.
I would just comment, because one thing about it is I understand this is what you recommend and you went through your decision process. But I would argue that there's some questions that I have. And one is, like you're talking about cell phones. When I call 911, they know where we are. Yes, that's built into the cell phones now. So that is already, people of these cell phones have this. It looks like, what, 2/3 of the cost of this, more? is in that call item. The other thing, are these shelters lightning safe? And if they're not, is it better bang for your buck to make them lightning safe as opposed to maybe duplicating what people already have in their pockets?
Is there anything lightning safe?
Yes, there is a process to make things lightning safe. There is an engineered process, and it has how you ground something and how it's built and its size. And I've certainly,
This is grounded. These shelters are grounded.
it's more than
Can't
just
imagine
grounding.
V-Trans would put one in that wasn't.
There's more of a process how it's grounded, and I think how big it is, and also it has to have, grounding coming down the side to make them lightning safe. I've certainly seen a lot of visitors on the island getting stuck in thunderstorms and not knowing where to go. So I understand this is your recommendation, but I haven't seen that you've gone through other options and that this is necessarily the best one. I haven't seen it sold to me that this is the best option for a shelter.
And, well, for me, it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, is going back to what I think Roger said. If the Lee-Tran is willing to put shelters like this in place, then you can have the conversation of adding these to it, initial installation. So for me, I'm worried about, as I've said several times, liability. Maybe, John, you can opine on this. If we put an emergency call button in there, do we now become liable for that entire shelter?
Could this,
No, but I think we're, at the framework here, threshold issue is, as I understand it, based on the conversation, Lee-Tran is not going to put in any more bus shelters. Let's not get around the peripherals. Bus shelters unless this town council tells them that they can place advertising. So that's the first issue. Do you want to allow them? Because beyond that, the discussion is essentially moot. Because Lee-Tran is saying, we need to derive a stream of income in order to maintain these things once they're placed. There's an initial cost up front, and then there's a cost for maintenance. We want to, as a condition of saying yes to these, we want to have an income stream. Up to now, the town council has told staff, including legal, no, we don't want advertising. Let's assume you say yes. Now you're about, what about the peripherals? Is it lightning proof or safe? And then the call boxes for safety. Just because the town asked for them and Lee-Tran puts them in, assuming Lee-Tran continues to operate the system, maintain the shelters, and maintain those boxes, that's a liability issue for Lee-Tran. However, as we have discussed ad nauseum here with this town council, when it comes to these types of issues, particularly to the, hey, we want you to pay for it, they also tend to say, now we want you to be responsible for it. And that then has that shifting of liability that you mentioned. So there's, I think, a couple of steps here. And the first step is as I understand it, that's a condition of putting in any of these additional shelters. The threshold issue for Lee-Tran is you have to allow us to advertise.
Well, in the sake of trying to move this forward, it seems to me that'd be a fairly easy trade to allow some advertising, using the caveat that the manager said, priority going to local businesses first. It would seem like a fair trade to at least get the ball moving, and then we can have the discussions about the emergency call. And Councilor Vici did say that people have their cell phones. Well, not everybody does. I can tell you a story of a personal friend of mine that came down to visit, left our house to go out to watch sunset. And it was dark, when he was coming back. He didn't take his cell phone with him. He was walking up and down the beach, and he came back to Estero Boulevard. He didn't know what street we lived on. He had no way to contact us, no way to contact anyone. And he literally just stood on the side of the road for half an hour until we went looking for him and found him. So not everyone brings their phone with them when they go somewhere. So this could be a very valuable piece of equipment to help someone in need.
I'm not arguing that it wouldn't be. I'm arguing is where's the analysis? That same person could have been out there caught in a lightning storm. I've seen tourists in lightning storms go into the ocean. away from the rain.
Okay,
A lot of them
we're getting a little off topic.
Wait a minute,
here,
though.
sorry.
No,
So
just,
wait,
here's,
so-
here's my point. Here's my point, though, is as far as a decision maker, and I would like to be presented with, to be convinced that this is the best way to go. Instead of just told, this is what we want, I'd like to see these cases put out and to be proven to me that this is the best way to go from a safety standpoint.
Okay, Heidi?
Okay, the problem, this is the problem. This was already presented to a council 2 years ago and approved, and here we are, rehashing it.
What I'm saying is, we already then moved on it. We talked to them.
It's not done.
They came back to us and said there must be advertising, and we said no.
No, but we already have the shelter that we want to put code blue on.
Okay, we're talking about two different things then. I'm talking about the 6 shelters.
Well, if we
Given
go
a
back to
directive.
2 years, we were approved to do the one shelter. That's what we got approved for. Council approved the one shelter with the shelter and the cold blue. And we're still waiting for the cold blue.
So the question,
That's what we're saying is like, we're still waiting.
so the question that we come to is, are we scrapping this? Are we actually going to get the code blue? We're going to test it and use it as the, it was approved that we're going to get the code blue in. If it's worthy to go back to do the additional 6 or 5 more that we want to do and test it? Or is this what it is and it's a glorified bus stop with
Me
the
ask-
shelter with no other code blue
Let me ask the
information?
town manager a question. Roger, if we're gonna go forward with that one stop, is the prerequisite to get the code blue, the advertising, is that the hangup, or is it approved already? We can put it in that one? What's the
So-
hangup on that one?
So a couple things. First of all, as I said earlier, the issue of doing one is not, is not an issue other than an allocation of monies. The
There's no
question-
restriction as to advertising on that particular one?
Well, so here's what's going to happen. So let's just say today, the council says, the damn blue on the thing. So,
Well, I'm bordering on that.
so then we contact Lee County, and one of two things are going to happen. They're going to say, no problem, we're going to do it, or no problem, you're going to do it, and here's the strings, if any, we're going to ask of you. And we bring that back to town council, and they say they want us to do, take 14 umbrella steps and 3 whirly steps, and then we could put it in. So that's how that plays out. The point is, on the budgeting part is,
Insignificant.
the money's insignificant for one. It's less than significant for 6, and it's definitely less than significant if we create the policy that allows bus shelters along the entire island. And that's why I feel that before we go forward with a decision about one, we just have to get clarification of what the council's policy is for either 6 or more shelters going forward. Because I don't want to create a situation where, we're here 2 years from now and they said, well, remember we told you we wanted to do 6 of these eventually. Here we are, where's the money? So let's get it vetted out now in its entirety and then make a decision to go forward.
Sounds like this is an issue we need to put on our agenda.
I would certainly agree to putting on the agenda if we want to fund code blue for the one on the town property that's been put in.
So just by way of background, as Heidi pointed out, we talked about this a couple of years ago. What was brought up was the concept, the public safety issue was the concept of providing safe haven capabilities along Estero Boulevard for people, whether they were walking and had a medical emergency, whether someone was out walking and they felt their life was in danger for some reason, maybe they were being stalked by somebody, that they knew and that the town would be able to advertise, and it was clear to the residents, and we made it visible to the tourists, that there was a place where they could go and get immediate contact with emergency services. Part of that safe haven, Code Blue is part of it. The other, and I want to make sure we don't miss this, was having camera capability in the area so that first responders could through their dispatcher, able to get visibility to what was going on there so that they could respond faster or provide guidance to whoever is there with that individual. I think the first thing is, as you're talking about this, do you want to continue with the safe haven concept, or are you building shelters up and down the boulevard? So if the safe haven concept is one you don't feel is necessary because you have confidence in the 9/11 GPS, which most people don't, but if that's the way you feel, that's the confidence that the code blue is not necessary, then the safe haven concept isn't relevant here because it could get safe haven anywhere because they got 9/11. Or you're providing these safe haven shelters as a public safety issue for both medical emergencies as well as safety of individuals on the island.
John,
That's the discussion.
what I was saying is, I'm trying to get us off square one here and move on to other items. This obvious discussion, we need to move it on to the town council agenda. You've given us your recommendation. We need to chew on it and decide whether we're going to move forward. So I'm asking for it to be put on the agenda. Somebody else agreed with me. I think it only takes two, so it's going to happen, right?
I would agree to put it on the agenda.
As part of that, would you want to add in that same discussion, reopening the discussion about the shelters or safe haven shelters, whatever you want to call it, adding that back into the same discussion as to relook at the advertising part of it?
I think we'll talk about the whole thing when we put it back on our agenda, but the point here is today is to tell them, you don't need to do anything else with this. We're putting it on our agenda. You've made your recommendation.
We're moving.
Let's move on to the next.
We're moving it forward.
Onward.
All right.
Okay. Bells and lights, we've handled that. We've purchased bells and lights. We appreciate Roxanne and other people distributing them. We'll get a better plan. We don't need to discuss this with you. We've got some other ideas that we want to do. The biggest issue is something that we've talked about is, can the town mandate lights on bikes from the rental companies? And there is a law from the town attorney, and I'm not going to read it to you. It's a bit long, but you're supposed to have a lamp on the front of the bicycle and one on the rear and a red reflector. The biggest issue we had was, should we be pushing some type of safety committee to say that we want you to mandate the town to have everybody who has a bicycle that they're renting, that they have to have this on there? If you want to take on that ball of wax, great. If not, we're going to take off this mandating the lower, and we're just going to focus on getting the bicycle bells and lights out to our residents and do more public relations with the public information person at the town, and we'll do more marketing on that. So there's I guess, the question on the second part.
Thing is, though, that the Florida law requires them to be on there, but our rental companies don't enforce it or have them on their bicycles.
Well, the law requires on a bicycle operated between sunset and sunrise, and they're saying they demand their bikes be back by sunset. So I don't know that we can require that.
People rent them for a week.
Yeah, that's the problem. If they're gonna rent it for more than a daylight period, that bike should have lights on it by Florida law, I think. And I think the town's in an excellent position to enforce that.
Is it an enforcement issue as far as you see it, or do you think that an additional ordinance requiring the rental companies to provide these on their bikes? Were you, John, did you?
Yes.
Yes,
That's something
it's
I
the
could,
latter.
yeah, that's something I could support, yeah.
ladder.
As it currently exists, absent any action from this council to adopt an ordinance requiring this as part of some type of registration by bike rental companies, the requirement of lighting is in Chapter 316 Florida statutes, and we don't have the authority to enforce the uniform traffic citation system where this is found in state law. That's a law enforcement function.
There's no question the preponderance of people rent those bikes for more than one day, particularly those who are visiting, yeah.
I understand, and I
No, but I'm
understand the ability to enforce something under the uniform traffic citation, give the deputy giving out a citation, is if they are riding a bike between the prescribed hours without the what I understand the committee is suggesting is the town adopting an ordinance that would require, as part of the licensing or of the operation of a bike rental company in the town, that rental company would have to require all of their bikes to have bells and lights, period.
You're saying that that's doable, is that correct?
That is doable.
well,
And it would be enforceable through the normal code enforcement process.
That makes perfect sense to me.
I was a little confused there when you were talking about the state one.
Would bring a lot of people into
If we'd made an ordinance that required them on any bike, say over 1 day rental,
Beach, you
had
got
to
lights
have
on
the
your
bells, whistles.
Period.
Your bike.
So, it would be enforceable in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night. They are required to have it on there.
Yeah, Council Hours, it can't be the terminal rental. It's either a bike,
On or off,
it's got to
okay.
have to have lights and, working lights and bell.
Right.
If it doesn't have working lights and bell, you're in violation of the code.
This means when you get a group of guys who are doing a 50-mile bike ride and they're coming down Estero Boulevard, they're,
But they're,
No.
no.
This is about the licensing of bike rental companies in the town. It's not about anyone coming in doing a rally or something like that. One would hope that those type of bike riders who are sophisticated know the requirements of Florida law. We're talking about licensing rental companies, bike rental companies in the town, as I understand is the recommendation of the
Correct.
committee.
Again,
Well, that
for
would solve
safety
it.
purposes, so you can see them.
That would solve a huge chunk of the problem right there.
Exactly.
Doubt it.
By the way, just for the record, we keep talking about lights, but audible devices are required 24 hours a day. So they're out of compliance even with the audible devices as well. So that's why the recommendation is, if you choose to come up with an ordinance that says for those handful that are just blatantly disregarding the statute that's out there, or bypassing the statute by saying, well, we tell them not to ride after sunset, then that's the choice.
I'd be in favor of adding this to an agenda for more conversation.
I would absolutely support that.
Yes, indeed.
Great.
Great.
Page 2.
Page 2. Woohoo. Bicycle, now, I'm going to apologize, this was before dawn. Bicycle restrictions in high-density pedestrian areas. Basically, we did a study before my time, so I am going to let someone else speak about it. But basically, about restricting riding in Times Square, we've done that, people walk their bikes. Having a little more, better traffic flow for the bikes in those high-density areas, again, for safety purposes, so the bikes aren't in the road when the road is congested. And Times Square and that strip from Times Square to the Lani Kai is very tight with pedestrian traffic, bike traffic if they bike, and cars, and it's chaotic. Somebody want to talk about the study when they handed it in? I mean,
There wasn't really a study. The question
Okay.
is, do you want us to look at
Okay, do you want us to-
expanding the restriction on riding bikes versus walking bikes beyond what currently is enforced for Times Square? That's just a question. Do you want us to look at other congested areas like Times Square was and extend that restriction on where they can ride and where they can't?
This one is a tough one for me because we're trying to promote more bicycle activity. And this is potentially, I understand Times Square, but, on the road where that is technically the bike lane, I don't know that this is something that I should spend a ton more time on if we're trying to promote the bike, to be able to use the bike lanes up and down the island. Unless you had something more specific, Dawn or someone, other than Times Square. I would hate to, I don't know how we'd ever enforce someone getting off their bike at whatever the street is and then they're gotta walk it, so.
And I think what would help is if rental companies had bells. You know what I mean? That would, at least people could know there's, in that section where it's really congested, the rental bikes have bells on them. That's going to help some of the problem as well.
maybe we table this since we are asking and or do you say no? We'll just
I would say-
get the road done and see
I
what
would
goes
say table
on.
this.
Okay.
All right.
Agree.
Sidewalk markings, now you pretty much answered that, Dan, I'm guessing, from the meeting with the line down the middle. The county's saying it poses more problems than safety.
Well, they didn't officially say anything, but just reading between the lines, I don't know that this is gonna be something that I mean, I'll continue to fight for it if the committee feels that it's important, but he did raise a very valid point about the dropping down.
Right.
And he said that, you know, the recommendations that they follow is that when you do a stripe down a road or a sidewalk like that the bike be on the side between the line and the street. So that's where that curb at every driveway goes down, and there was some concern about safety. So it might be counterproductive as far as, you know, creating what could potentially be a bigger hazard than not putting the line down. But that's just on that one.
I have to say, he actually changed my mind. I was in favor of drawing the line down the sidewalk until he pointed that out, and it made perfect sense to me that where you have to put the bicycle is dangerous now. So I would no longer advocate for the sidewalk marking. So I would say take this off.
Particularly for elderly and young, that he said that would pose some significant safety issues for those groups of riders with that up and down, particularly if you're riding a tricycle or something like that, that's, you know, that their data shows that's what causes injuries. If the whole idea is avoiding injuries, it's counterproductive.
We'll remove it.
No, it was worth looking into, though, I'll tell you, because I've said this before, in Southern California, they have the Strand down there, Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, and so forth, and they have a bike lane, they have a pedestrian lane, they have a little, walking lane, and then they have the vehicle lane over here. It's on a boardwalk. It's a little bit different than Estero Boulevard, but not too much different, and it works. It works, although there's heavy enforcement by their police and so forth, but it was definitely worth looking into. And well, I don't know what the answer is going to be in that one little stretch there, but
And again, this goes back to what you said, Heidi. Having bikes with noisemakers on them could help alleviate some of this issue.
People are aware of what the bell means on a bike. Polite way of letting people know you're going.
Okay, onward. Bike lane markings. We did the test at the north end of the island by having lime green in the bike path or bike lanes, which we thought was fantastic. You could see them. Our recommendation was to get it down the rest of the road. And I know I think we're sitting and waiting if it's Lee County or if.
He brought that up today also.
Yeah, I mean, not to try to take this over, but I did ask
Go
him
ahead, no,
about it
that's
today. And again, you know, they referenced the Green Book, and it is being discussed. There has been communications that I've had with Sandelli and with other people at the county. They are looking at it. It's in their hands, in my opinion, as far as we have to, as Roger has said, we have to get their approval to do anything or get them to do anything. There's very specific things they've got to look at, and he tied it into the crosswalks as well as changing things up, and it's not the same thing over and over. So he did say that, you know, the entire length of the island having the green stripe is not something that's going to happen. He didn't say that, but that's, again, reading between the lines. But it didn't sound to me like this is a dead issue. It sounds to me like they're still looking at it. There's specific paints they got to look at that's got some raised granule things in it so it's not slippery. Where do you put it? Do you put it where the dotted lines are only, or, you know, so they're still looking at what is, because we're not just the only place that they're looking at it. They're looking at it in other places throughout Lee County. And they do have a couple of places that are out there in Estero. I know for one, they've got a test pattern out there on one of the streets that comes up to 41. So they are working at it. I can't promise you it's going to happen overnight, but they are still looking at it, and I'll keep pushing them.
I'm going to take it off, and we're going to come up with a new way to get on these. All right, homeless community. I know that we have, Roxanne had brought up that we work with the churches and talk about the homeless community as well with LCSO. And I know John met with the group, and I think we are still in the process of working together with everyone to come up with if there is an issue, if there's a plan, what we need to do. I will say, I heard about the incident at the library, and it's one of those things that I feel like we need to be prepared and know what's going on the island as the safety committee, because I had no idea that it had happened, and Brady asked, what are you going to do about it? And
It's probably my fault, Don, because the captain called me right away.
Oh, he did?
And he told me about the incident, and he said there really wasn't much about it.
okay, good to
It's the
know.
recent incident.
I've not heard what recent incident, we don't get informed of
There
these
was a-
things either, so don't feel
There was a
bad.
homeless man, I think, that created a disturbance in the library, and when they tried to bring him under control, he then barricaded himself into a bathroom. So they
cleared
called
the
the
whole
sheriff, and
library.
they kind of just talked him out. It was really a very low-key, handled very nicely by the deputies that are.
It was over a Wi-Fi issue, and going to telegraph spread it very fast.
Very
It became a
fast.
very big issue that was really much of nothing.
Right, but it's one of those things that, which maybe I'm going to add that to our agenda on something else. But is there anything, John, you want to add on the homeless community?
Actually,
Roxanne, go ahead.
the thing I would add is I was present at the meeting with John and the beach ministerial situation. They were very responsive to John. They organized that they were going to send you all a report with all the different programs that all the different churches are doing, and they were very responsive to having a meeting with you, which was set up, but then canceled. So
It was
they're.
never, it was set up, it was proposed. What we had was a transition in chairmanship, and we also had this joint meeting set up to make sure that this was still a priority for the council to go forward. The idea is, as Rexanne said, we did meet with them. They were very much, my impression was they were very much in favor of having a joint meeting that included representation from the town council, the sheriff, the fire department, and if we can get county resources to come to that meeting. The idea of the meeting would be a special meeting of the Public Safety Committee. Each of those organizations would tell what services they offer and how they offer them. That would give the opportunity for an exchange of ideas where they could overlap, where they overlap, where there's gaps, and if there's something that the town could do to help fill some of those gaps and also increase the understanding of exactly what's going on. I did get and forwarded on to Dawn the list of all the activities that they do. It's an extensive list, and that's the type of thing they would talk about, what they do and how they do it. And the same when we talked to Scott from, the assistant chief from, the Fort Myers Beach Fire Department, as well as, Tim from the sheriff. And what we need to do is just get the contact, information from the county. And if you still want this as a priority, we'll set up a special meeting. At our next meeting, we'll set up this and get it going.
Madam Vice Mayor, has the church or the Public Safety Committee reached out to speak to the homeless task force at Lee County? We have a very, very good task force in place now that specifically is meant to deal with this situation. I think that might be a good
The
resource.
Ministerial Association has different people who come in and speak to them at different meetings. They've had people there working with the homeless. The task force is somebody that's on the agenda for the future, but we've had people in from different organizations and communicating with them. But the thing I'd like to concentrate here on is that the Ministerial Association is waiting to hear back from you as to whether there's going to be a meeting. And I would caution you to try to do it as soon as possible, because they're all going to get busy. They all wanted to be there. All the churches wanted to send a representative, but clearing a date with them as you get closer to the holidays, you're going to have people dropping out because they've got things going on with the churches.
And I did write back to them and explain what was going on and why there was a delay. So I did write back to, I don't remember the woman's name that sent me this.
Denise is the person who coordinates their stuff.
Okay.
So we're going to keep moving forward with this, and we'll just answer that question, and we'll get it going with them.
One more piece is I was told that part of the outreach center that's now at the Baptist Church, that they had the sheriff's office had some like community services coordinator.
Yes,
We talked to quite a few of the.
Sarah is there.
I don't think she's there anymore. There's a new person there. Met her last night. I don't have her name. I don't know if Carrie's.
She'll be a part of this, I assume.
Dawn?
Okay, Sanibel Crossing Aids, I know that you were discussing them earlier today. I know that it's a volunteer thing. Is there anything really that we need to do on this?
No.
No.
Nice. Parking application, I would like to remove this. Mainly, there was someone at the city, I wish Roger was still here, who is handling this. There was someone who took it over on the app side.
Parking staff.
Right, so we don't need to do anything with that.
I don't really see that applies to public safety.
I completely agree. All right, neighborhood watch, we're gonna leave this in here because we've got some things that we're gonna work with Lee County Sheriff, and I think we should, because we could do education with the town and go from there unless there's anything else that you know. And with Fort Myers Beach Fire Department, we've been talking about educational programs and training, and goes hand in hand with that public safety website icon. I'm combining a few things here. We'll work together with the public information person as well as town, and any things that you want to get out to the public, and start amping up our communication to the.
Hey, Don, just a question on that. So are you trying to educate people who are renting the units?
The
people who are
owners of the short-term rentals.
Owners of them? There is a project which is kind of in its infancy. We're looking at coming up with a 3-ring binder that they would put in rental units that most places already have. They have information for the public. There may be a place that we could put additional information. I mean, information for the people who are actually there visiting.
This is actually two things. One is the icon that Dawn is talking about, but a year ago when we started reviewing the monthly reports, probably almost 2 years ago now, and talking to Scott, what was found out is that they have mandatory fire inspections if it's 3 units or more. Under that, there is no mandatory inspection. The concept that was kicked around is we have a short-term rental registration database here. We have a process where we register people that are short-term rentals. If it was a rental that was under 2 units, to either automatically link them, to voluntarily link them, but the idea was to take the town database and the town registration process and build into that the educational, the training inspections, how to do a building inspection, and either mandate it for the people that have short-term rentals, or put it in there as, this is available to you, and we recommend you do this. So the question is, as far as this one goes, do you want us to look into linking the short-term rental registration process and the fire inspection education program? So is it a voluntary linkage, or is it something you're going to mandate that they indicate that they went and learned how to do a self-inspection?
Isn't this a jurisdictional issue? The fire department, isn't this a fire department issue?
Actually,
Well, the idea is that you have the number of the short-term rentals. I believe, Bill, you said it's like 2,500 or something now. It's ever increasing. And the idea was, since you have that registration database, using that to link to the education material that the fire department has, and making that available to those that register for short-term rentals on how to do a safety inspection.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to save you some breaths. When you now register your short-term rental, you now have to provide a certificate that has been inspected by the fire department, starting with this year's registration.
3 or less?
But if it's
Anyway.
less than 3, that certificate is not required because the fire department, I
Not-
don't believe, inspects.
Roger, can you help me on this? Not from what I understand. When I got the notice, I understood that, which they are, but I understand that each unit you have to turn in a certificate. The fire department will email me a certificate when they pass, or whatever. And my understanding was with each registration, I had to turn in a copy of that certificate. Am I wrong? Did I misread the?
I think you're correct as it relates to the ones they have inspected already. I don't think our ordinances would have to, if I were in a position where I could check on it, I would. I don't think our ordinances at the fire district require inspections on less than units. Consequently, they're not going to be inspecting those single units or double units, and they won't be a certificate on file for them to forward to the city. I think the idea that we were discussing was trying to fill that gap in a way that would either require them to, when they registered, to reach out to the fire department or get the information on how to self-inspect, or ask the fire department to come in and do an inspection. I know the fire department will come in and do an inspection for anyone that wants one. But I don't believe it's required for those that are just 1 and 2.
The bottom line is, do you want us to look into linking short-term rental registrations and education material from the fire department? And then we pursue, because it was, the last time we met with Scott, and it's been a while, it was, if it's under 3 units, there was no mandatory fire inspection. This was a way to fill that gap, as Jim points out, to be able to provide to those people that have less than 3 units, education material to inspect their property to improve the safety of it.
I have no problem with giving them information, anybody that's in our registration with giving them information. I just don't want us to jump into requiring inspection as a town, because that's the fire
That's the
department's.
fire district's responsibility.
That's their
correct.
jurisdiction. So if you want to give them information from the town and you want to look into that, that's fine. We could say, here's a link. When you sign up, here's a link.
So, if I may,
Well, there was reference earlier to making it mandatory, to have them inspected.
Again, that's why we bring it up, because these were the suggestions that were made over time by the committee.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, when Ron Martin was made the chief, he and I had a meeting, and it was a very good meeting, and I think we're working very collaboratively. So with respect to the question that Heidi asked, we're trying to drive people to contact the fire department, and hopefully, as a result of that, they will ask for get information and/or a voluntary inspection.
Okay, so that's,
Or be told they don't need one, but we'd be happy to come inspect it anyway, that type of thing.
Got
So
it.
that's A. B is, I told Chief Martin that our vacation rental database is a public record and is available to him and his department all the time. So they can go through it and say, we issue inspection reports through these. We haven't to these because they're single family, but we're going to elect to do follow-up with them to offer them their array of services that they can offer, whether that's voluntary inspections, or that we're going to mail you best practices, or whatever it's going to be, to try to close that informational gap. So information is available to them for follow-up to the extent they wish to follow it up, and help people who are in the vacation rental operational business, whether you're a full practitioner of your part-time residence or you're in it with multiple residences, you have the available expertise of the fire district.
Don, it sounds like this is taken care of and you can take it off.
So who's notifying them and providing this?
Well, they have access to our database all the time.
What you're suggesting is
And,
that the
and
fire
they,
department
and
would take
also
the
they can
initiative.
get the list, because we have a list.
That's not my question. So basically, you're saying to the new chief that here's the information, it's up to you guys if you're gonna contact him or not? As opposed to what we had said was, as part of the registration process, build in that information as when they're registered with the town, is the town being proactive, using fire department material. It sounds like it's gonna be, the town will be passive in saying, here's the information, fire department, wanna go ahead and pursue.
We're not being passive.
Oh, I
This is
disagree with
fire department jurisdiction. We're telling them, we'll give you the information, and you guys, they're serious about it. So I don't see it as us being passive. We're giving them the information, and I'm sure they're going to deal with it.
I think the thing is, if they ask us to do something, if they say, look, when I respond back to Heidi and say, here's your registration number, by the way, will you attach this document to it? We'd be happy to do that. If they want to email a document to that person directly, they can do that. If they want to send the person information through the US mail, they can do that. We're not saying that we're just handing them and say it's your problem. We're working collaboratively with them. I think the process is there. If they generate materials that they want us to distribute, of course we'll cooperate with them and distribute.
That was the question. I think that really this is about.
Off topic, Jim, if you can answer, why do they only inspect 3 units, but what's the reason for that?
There is a history behind that ordinance, and the last time we addressed it and discussed it, there was some concerns about, I think, getting into the lives of too many people on single-family units, and there wasn't a history or experience with doing that here, and so fire department, I think, was taking this incrementally and starting. This is just my interpretation of what I gleaned from the discussion at that commission meeting was, we're doing 3. It's possible down the road we would be more aggressive towards doing inspections of 2s or 1s, but would be a lot, and it might get some blowback, as word has been used here, if we tried to do that. So I think that was an incremental step on the part of the commission.
But a single-family resident could voluntarily reach out to you
Absolutely.
for an inspection.
And they
Would they get a
They would get an
certificate then?
inspection, right, and then that would be at no cost to them.
Really?
To the best of my knowledge, we will come in and do it.
So,
But
I'm just
don't
curious.
quote me on that. 'Cause
Right, no,
the-
because
the
there is
fire
a
chief
fee
might
for the
disagree.
inspection. There's a fee, it's like $95 for them to do the inspection.
Okay, well, then I suspect that whatever that is, that would be what it would.
Right,
they
and
would
it
be
kind of, it
required.
goes by the square footage,
Right.
something of the house,
Yeah,
of the home.
when they do and if it's a voluntary inspection, I'm gonna say I don't know the answer to
Right.
whether or not they charge for a voluntary inspection. If it's a mandatorily required, if it's a statutorily required or ordinance required inspection, I'm sure there is a fee attached to it.
Talk to them.
Okay,
Department.
Well, I can find out from them.
All right.
that'd be great.
We'll talk to the fire department at the next meeting. All right, cameras, do you want us to, that you've pushed that through for the purchases of camera? Do you want the Public Safety Committee's involvement to determine the locations and monitoring? Or are you working with Lee County Sheriff and you've had that handled and it's really something you don't want us to work on?
I think this has already kind of been asked and answered. It's on the track now, it's on its way.
Right.
I don't know how much more the Public Safety Committee would add to this part of it.
That's what I thought, perfect, okay. Adult video gaming, a little bit of a conflict of interest, I think, for us, since Susie's the one who's put in the request, so not really sure how we should handle that one.
Let me ask you a question, for the sake of recusing yourself in this conversation. Plan on pursuing that any further?
Yes.
Do. Well, then I would say maybe you should look into it.
Is this really a public safety?
The reason it ended up on here was, you mentioned the Public Safety Committee looking into. you know,
I
the history
mentioned
of
it
that.
because when I was doing some research on it, the city of Jacksonville had some serious public safety concerns, and they ended up banning them in Jacksonville through ordinance. And I'm not making a declaration on the issue, but that's just Google it. It's just, that's what came up. I thought,
Actually,
yeah.
just, since I'm involved in
Yeah.
this, I actually reached out and had a discussion with Captain Layler prior to my hearing and asked him to come and present documentation and statistics on crime-related activities in reference to the adult gaming establishments, and said that the Lee County Sheriff involved in a council regarding that. If you would like to reach out to him individually or as a group, he'd be happy to provide you with that statistic or those statistics. And that he said, just generally, I don't have any issues with it.
It's fine. I just, in preparing for the hearing, I had just read those clips and therefore, yeah, John's.
I
That's
highly
really why I
recommend that
suggested
all
it, yeah.
conversations regarding this matter cease
Yeah,
immediately.
I agree. I agree. There's a conflict here.
And that's why I say we should not be giving this to the Public Safety Committee as an item for discussion.
It should not, based on the information that's been provided. My strong recommendation, not be sent to the Public Safety Advisory Committee, and that you not have any conversations, because it's likely the matter will come back before you at a future time in the context of a quasi-judicial item, and appropriate to have types of conversations.
Based on the advice of counsel, I think that's probably pretty sound.
No
Well, that's
disrespect
fine.
to
No
anyone.
disrespect.
I said the same, we said
Same
the same
thing.
thing.
Yep.
We haven't done anything with it. Public safety website icon, we'll work on that. I don't have a question on that.
I do have one thing. Jim, you brought up something at the end of the meeting, or when I was watching the meeting, something about us working with the Voice or meeting with the Voice in today's meeting.
We were talking about the blue shirts in Sanibel, and I think there was jurisdictional issues with not having our own police department, and then there was discussion of working cooperatively with Lee County Sheriff. And I may have said, I can't remember, but it seemed like a natural thing for the Public Safety Committee to be involved in. I don't know if that's the will of the committee or not. I think we mentioned it earlier, but
We actually talked about that already on this list, the Sanibel Crossing age, isn't that?
Right, but then I'm just referring to what he said in the meeting today, that they brought up the voice about, doing something, meeting with them, or
That up.
you did, okay, sorry.
Okay, but the idea was, I was looking at the situation on Sanibel. They use these blue shirt volunteers over there. And I said, why can't we do the same thing to keep the people on the sidewalks instead of putting up the rails and the landscape and everything else? And it was brought to my attention that they work under the auspices of the Sanibel Police Department. So they're being guided by the Sanibel Police Department. Well, that's when I said, well, why couldn't we employ the voice folks under the auspices of the Lee County Sheriff's Office? Well, that's where that was headed. So that's something to be researched, and if you want to have the committee look into that, it doesn't matter to me, one way or the other.
Mr. Mayor, didn't you already request that it be added to the agenda
I
management?
did, you're right, thanks for reminding me. Anyhow, it's,
I guess the thing I would chime in on this is that whenever I have driven by during season and there hasn't been somebody down there, I go and ask Roger why, and he has many, many times told me they didn't have anybody available. So they already cannot fulfill what we have asked them to provide. So thinking that they're going to get 6 more people out there to guide people to crosswalks, I think is highly unlikely.
well, you may be right,
never
but
know.
that sounds anecdotal. I would like to have a conversation with Lee County Sheriff, and I think it's worth a serious look, because if they're not just volunteers, then they have to be folks that are hired and trained. You know, that there's a cost-benefit analysis to this traffic issue, and it's going to get to the point where it's in the public interest for us to take some radical action. And if that means employing additional people to help that flow of traffic, we're going to have to do something at some point. And I just don't want to dismiss it as we haven't, because Lee County couldn't find somebody that day, or we have to create a sense of urgency about this, I feel, because it's gonna choke our island to the point where this beautiful renaissance that is occurring is going to be hampered. And I think the idea by the mayor is an excellent one, and I think it's something we ought to pursue aggressively. And, you know, listening to the Lee County transportation person this morning kind of poo-poo a lot of the ideas. I mean, and me have some very good reasons to do that. This is an area that seems to be effective, and just because Lee County can't find somebody, I don't think that's enough. I don't even know if that's true. I mean, anecdotally, it sounds like it may be, but I'd like to explore that further, because I think that's one of the few areas that we can really have an impact. I think from a cost standpoint, a cost-benefit standpoint, this could be huge for our island. That's just my opinion.
well, it's just one more piece of the puzzle.
That's
know,
not
and
the solution,
It's
but-
one more piece, and, you know, if we were even considering spending hundreds of $1,000s on community policing, certainly we could consider the possibility of expending some funds, and I'm not saying we're going to, but we could consider the possibility of it, of expending funds for these voice people, even if the sheriff had to go out and hire people. I mean,
I thought voice wasn't paid.
well, they're volunteers, but so maybe he could. That doesn't mean they couldn't have paid people out there. The people on Sanibel are paid by the citizens of Sanibel. So I mean, it could be done. It could be done, and it's just like everything else. You know, there's a cost for everything, and we'd have to sit down with the sheriff and negotiate something. But it's a possibility. You know, we're not saying it can be done, but it's certainly worth exploring.
Have
Would
we
you
already
like
put this
us-
on the agenda?
That's why it's on the agenda.
I
Want
don't
us
think it's
to look
something
into
to give
it?
to them, because we've got to approach the sheriff and see if they're even willing to talk
Yeah,
about it
maybe.
before we would have them put it on as an action item.
Oh, there are a lot of unanswered questions that maybe the committee would want to bite off and look into prior to us doing that. I don't know. It depends how you all feel.
Maybe it would be a good thing for the committee to look at what crosswalks they would be most beneficial at. I think we all, just by an eye test, can tell without looking, but I don't know how much time you want to expend on which crosswalks would be beneficial to have people, but or, I said, the eye test is very easy to tell where they're needed, but if that's something the committee feels is important enough, there's enough there, enough meat on the bone to make it worthwhile.
Do you guys have anything you want us to add to?
Right.
We get there,
Heidi, before we get to that, can I just
sorry.
add to what Council Alves was saying? If the council elects to ask you to do that, please give us worst location, second worst location, third worst location, so as we move forward, we can work from the worst situation to the best situation.
very good point.
Could I just go on record and saying, I think it would be great if the Public Safety Committee did look at that. I know, Dawn, you live on Palermo there. You're at the heart of it. You see the strengths and weaknesses of that area every day. Your input would be invaluable, as well as the whole committee. I mean, you all see it, and I would welcome your input.
Tell you where you're going to be able to get some firsthand knowledge of that is at the shrimp festival, the shrimp parade. All you have to do is watch when they hold back the crowds on that parade where people are crossing the boulevard, and that's a lot of the same places that the average tourist tries to cut across during the season as well. It's just a
Will
thought.
be some changes though, based on, since I do live down there and I see it all, when Margaritaville's there,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
a huge influx that will be gone because the people aren't coming in and parking there. They'll be routed differently from
It
Margaritaville.
will be. You're right about that.
Again, is there any, I guess we will be paring down our list, and I didn't mean to sound so combative at the beginning. It's just, as you can see, there's been some items on here that were before your time, way before my time, that where we're at, and we were getting frustrated on that. We want to work together with you. We want to give you your recommendations. We know you're not going to agree with everything we say. We do have things that I think we would like to be able to present back to you for next budgeting that you revisit. Community policing would be one. That was something we recommended, and I know it's it's dead this year, but we would like to resurrect that, and we want to be able to have that open line of communication with you that we can do that, those types of things.
That's one of the things, and if any member of the council members would like to join, I would like to see you work, as collaboratively as you can with the HOT team from Lee County Sheriff's Office and the Community Response Unit. They have a plethora of free programs that they'd be more than happy to work with the Public Safety Committee, whether it be Neighborhood Watch, whether it be like Neighborhood Watch, self-defense classes, things like that they could do. Maybe the committee could look at and come up with a program that could be funneled through the public information officer to get out to the public of places that they could do it at the outreach center or women's club or wherever else, town hall, whatever, to come up with some things. And maybe there's some programs that they have that would work well with short-term rentals, that would work with the fire department as far as best practices to, keep your place safe if someone's coming to stay there. Some things like that. I think those are two very good free resources that the town has access to, that I'd like to see you guys work with them to maybe come up with some programs that would be beneficial for the public safety.
I would just like to say to you, I really appreciate the efforts you're taking and your passion for the safety of the people on the island. I think that discussions based on passion are a good thing, and we can disagree, but it never means disrespect. I really thank you for what you do, and I appreciate all of your opinions.
We'll echo all of those, and just remind everybody once again, we're all on the same team. We're all trying to do what's best for the island here. And I have one more announcement, if there's nothing else for the good of the order. I got my booster shot yesterday. That's why I'm so like this all day. No, but I just want to remind everybody that got their shots at the same time I did down at the Baptist Church, that was several hundred people, that they are now eligible, if they so wish, for their booster shot.
And there is going to be a clinic here on the island.
Is there?
I'm getting out my phone to try and find the date.
Oh, good for you.
Was that shot the reason why the pitch didn't go quite like you wanted to?
Exactly. But everything's fine. If there's, Mike? What is?
We can go over this.
We did, we talked about,
No, we did.
yeah.
Is this the landscaping that's gonna be in the middle of the road here?
Yes. That's the landscaping design from FDOT's landscaping architect.
This is a hazard.
Well, what I will say about that is that, it's being
Somebody's gonna
reviewed,
get
it's
killed
being,
down there.
yeah, well, it's being reviewed by the professional engineers that are part of FDOT's team.
It needs to be stayed clear, just like,
And their landscape architect. And then, of course, it's being, their outside professionals working on it. And then it's being reviewed by the internal FDOT engineers. So to the extent that there's any comment about that plan, or we've had some comments about different species of trees and things like that, we could bring it forward, but it needs to be specific at that level.
we discussed it during our meetings, and I said, that's gonna be elderly people, kids, and everybody crossing the road down there. And that's just gonna make it difficult to see them.
Mike, when FDOT was in here, myself as well as several other council members made the arguments that you're making. They have heard from us. I don't think that they're done hearing from us. We share, at least speaking for myself, I share the same concerns that you have.
And a lot of their reasoning was that there's now a light there. And so the light will have a regular cycle and people will be crossing at the light. Traffic stopped by the light. So it won't be just like it is now where people walk across through traffic as much, hopefully.
That's a fantasy. There's not a 5-year-old in the world that's not gonna just bolt out between those bushes there and get hit sometime. And every time we add more capability for people to do that, or to hide behind a bush or a tree, we're increasing that risk. And that's what Mike's been trying to point out is, and I listened to FDOT's presentation, and I remember the engineer was very proud of himself for maximizing pedestrian flow at the foot of the bridge. When I heard that, I say, that is the exact opposite of what we want to do. And that's the way that was designed. And I wholeheartedly support what Mike's been saying for over a year now, that any kind of foliage that's in there, that's going to be an opportunity for a kid to hide behind. These kids are on vacation. They're no different than the adults that are out here crossing the street without looking. That's a disaster if that foliage in that area provides any kind of hiding place or blockage to visibility by any kind of vehicles going through there, especially if the light changes and they take off. That little kid's not going to notice that light changed. This, I don't think, and I agree 100% with Mike, cannot emphasize enough that landscaping there has to consider the type of environment that we're in, which is a resort area where people are here to play. They're not here to worry about traffic.
No, I didn't see in any of these designs the walk, don't walk symbols that would help control pedestrian movement and coordinate that movement with the traffic signal. And in all the pictures they have here, they don't show walk and don't walk signs. They will, I mean, people tend to respond to those. If you walk up there, even if there's something to obscure their visibility, they won't step out in the street if it says don't walk. They typically, but I don't see that here. So I'm hoping that they intend to put that in.
They indicated
to the
that they
process.
were.
That they would.
You
I think
said-
that will help a
You
lot.
said at the beginning of the meeting, I don't know who mentioned it, but, people, when you're sitting in traffic, people are gonna run that light yellow, It's gonna happen, somebody's gonna take it out.
Well, I mean, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I will tell you that stuff is synchronized with the pedestrian. So when countdown goes from, or the figure goes from green to yellow to red, light doesn't turn green right there, waits a second and turns green. That's all. So that's all computer time. Obviously it can get out of sync if there's a electrical glitch. With respect to the landscaping, I mean, the easiest way, if you all want it to be sod, it's very easy. If no one steps up and agrees to maintain the landscaping, FDOT told us it'll be, the county told us it'll be sod, so.
Well, that's it. That's where,
There you go.
And a lot of times there's trade-offs for things. And so the comp plan says that we should have trees lining Sarah Boulevard on both sides. Can't do that. And one of the reasons is because it's a major street and we block the view corridors. And power lines are going to come down. A lot of times there's trade-off. I assume that the vegetation here was designed, with that in mind, because when I look at the artist renderings, it looks like this stuff is knee-high. Except, most of the shrubbery is like knee-high, so it's not like a bush that someone's gonna hide behind.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, I found that there's going to be a Lee Health vaccine clinic at the Beach Baptist Church on Tuesday, November 16th. It is a walk-in clinic. You do not have to have an appointment between 9 and noon. You can receive the first or second vaccine or the booster.
Excellent.
What's the
Which one
date
is
again?
it? Pfizer or Moderna or both?
November 16th.
It does not say on here, so you would have to contact Lee Health to find out which one it is they're giving. I know that when I recently went, they had both. So,
And they're actually encouraging mixing and matching now.
Yes.
So, I mean, it doesn't really, not
so November 16th, Tuesday, 9 to noon.
excellent. Anything else for the good of the group? Well, I thank you, council. I thank you, Safety Task Force. It was a great meeting, and let's do it again sometime.
Very much.
Thank you.
We're adjourned at 1:10.